thank you for speaking to PTI. You have been watching the U.S. presidential election very closely from Washington. So what is your take? In fact, just 2 days left and we have a very tight race. What do you have to say?
Well, I think the race is tight, and it's going to continue to be tighter still. It's too close to tell, even with 2 days to left, and we may not have the results on the day after Election Day. So we're most likely going to get the results later in the week, if not maybe a week later. Kamala Harris seems to have closed the gap slightly more in terms of her approval rating. Donald Trump has made a historic comeback with his return from the political wilderness. He was being hit with lawsuits, legal troubles last year, but he has shown that he has won the nomination of the party this year, and he has shown that he is the only candidate who can defeat the Democrat Party and Kamala Harris and the Biden administration. And I think it's going to be an interesting race no matter what. Hopefully we don't have a repeat of what happened in the 2020 cycle with a lot of the calls for fake votes and sort of recounts and violence. So everybody in America, I think, is holding their breath and hoping for the best result and hoping for a peaceful transition if there is one, or if Kamala Harris wins, then she becomes the first female Indian origin president of the United States.
So as you talked about Kamala Harris's Indian heritage, so is it actually influencing the Indian voters or Indian American voters?
So from what we've seen in terms of the surveys and the polling, it's influenced it very little. I think Indian Americans here tend to vote more on the issues and more on things that they care about, which is the economy, which is things like female voting rights and abortion issues and those kind of things. And so there's much more Indian Americans support Kamala Harris than they support Trump. But I don't think they're voting on her solely based on her identity, because that's just not something that's revealed. So.
Actually, analysts, pro Kamala Harris camp analysts are saying that electing Trump will be like going back to a dark period of U.S. history. How do you see this criticism?
I think it's fair to say that. I think we saw violence last time in 2021. So I think it's totally fair for her to make that accusation. But I also think that they have issues of their own that they have not really owned up to. We've seen a lot of violence in the campuses this year. We've seen a lot of protests this year against the Trump campaign from the Democrat side that has not been very peaceful themselves. So I think they have issues of their own that they have not addressed, and I think that's going to come out in the polls. A lot of the people aren't happy with the way that the Democrat Party has been talking about things like calling Republicans Nazis and those kind of things, fascism charges. These are just not the typical kind of way to behave in American rhetoric, and so I think that's going to reveal itself in the polls if that is something that people are unhappy with. We had President Biden calling Trump supporters garbage recently, so the rhetoric is bad on both sides, in my opinion.
Now the race is neck and neck, but so Trump has made significant progress in the last few years. He was in a very difficult spot in 2022, and a lot of people say he made a very forward movement and to make the race very tight. What do you have to say?
Yeah, I think it's been a historic comeback for him. He had legal troubles. Justice Department was after him left and right. He was losing a lot of money in legal battles. I think, regardless of what you believe about him, whether you support him or don't support him, he's made one of the biggest comebacks since, I would say, Richard Nixon, in terms of the political struggles that he's had over the last 4 years, I would say.
The Indian American community also, plays a role in a number of swing states, including Georgia, Pennsylvania, etc. So how do you have to analyze their political presence? Is it significant? Is it going to be significant in states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, because these are the swing states?
I'm not sure if they're going to be super significant. I don't think they're going to be carrying the vote, because you have to understand the Indian community. You have professionals who typically are urban dwelling people, who are typically professionals in the middle class. They tend to be more Democratic. The Indian business class tends to lean more Republican. They're more prevalent in places like Georgia, New York, and Pennsylvania, but they're smaller in number, and they're more interested in funding races rather than coming out and voting for people in large numbers. So I think it's not as significant as I would like it to be, but it's very obvious we're prominent across the board. There's Indians in the Republican Party, there's Indians in the Democrat Party, and they're all over in senior leadership and in senior positions in both parties, which is I think it's a good thing. It's a thing to celebrate.
Anand, in fact, what are the areas that you think, in fact, India and U.S. can still expand cooperation going forward?
So, like I said, we had the Quad agreement under the Biden administration. That was really, really important. I think it's important to look at American foreign policy. America is currently sort of dealing with Ukraine and the Middle East, and those are issues that are distracting from what always happens in America, where Obama, Trump, and Biden have tried to do the so-called pivot to Asia, which I think is going to be where India is going to play a much more crucial role. So the setup of the Quad and the Quad meetings that have happened on a regular basis are much more important. The defense deals are much more important than people believe, and in the future we're going to see a lot of chaos, I believe, in Asia with regards to Taiwan, with regards to China, and I think India is going to play a much more crucial role in those conflicts if they happen at all. And so I think that's really how the American foreign policy of the future president, where a future president is going to, place their emphasis or going to place their foreign policy on, is going to be determining that. And I think like I said, India is going to be a crucial pillar in any foreign policy of the in America's Asian policy going forward. Defense policy, like I said, is very important. Predator drone sales, aircraft sales. India needs to shore up its air force. I think those are crucial areas where America can be helpful on. The smaller issues like the Pannun issue, the Canada-India fight over this Khalistani issue is going to be, I think, a much more smaller fight. It's going to be, dealt out through diplomatic channels. And if we keep fighting it over in social media and in the news, it's not going to be good. It's not going to be a good thing for either country. And I think both countries understand that, and that's why India sent over its diplomatic team recently to investigate the Pannun issue and cooperate in the Pannun issue.
So basically, you are essentially saying that the Pannun issue is a very small issue and it is not going to impact the overall India-U.S. relations.
Yeah, well, look at the statements by the State Department spokesman, right? They say that they're emphasizing that India should cooperate with Canada, and they say that they are going to continue to cooperate with Canada on these issues. But they themselves make no statements regarding what India has done. They make no qualitative, declarative statements that India is acting negatively or India is acting in a bad way. So most of these fights are happening in the media. They're happening in the news issues and on social media. And behind in the back channels, what's happening is actual diplomatic cooperation. And this issue should have never come out into the front pages of the news. It should have been fought and should have been resolved through diplomatic channels. And that's what India and the U.S. are doing. Canada is much more interested in generating news about this because there's an election going on in Canada next year. So I think that's the context that this fight has to be seen in, that there's actual election concerns in Canada that are causing this fight to come out into the open. And India and the U.S. are cooperating as they normally have.
I spoke to Neil Nikhiza, the Democratic leader from Pennsylvania, a couple of days back, and he said that the relations between India and U.S. is going to be the most important relations for Washington. So he's a Democratic leader, and I think it is an indication that Ms. Harris, if she becomes the president, will focus on expanding relations. How do you see this?
I think that's fair. Like I said, I think all Democrat and Republican administrations have tried to pivot America's foreign policy towards Asia, which they see as a much more critical issue than, the fight in Israel, the fight in Ukraine, that have sort of distracted America from the real policy that they want to implement, which is, focusing on Asia, the Quad, Japan, Australia, India being the much more important partners that they would wish to focus on. And so I think even if we have a Democrat administration that comes in and maybe sort of makes noises about India on some issues, ultimately I think they're going to continue cooperating with India. They're going to continue treating India as a strategic partner, and they're going to continue this mutual trust and diplomatic relationship that has gone on under multiple administrations since the Bush administration, really.
So finally, as a keen observer of politics as well, expertise on the international affairs. Who will win the election? In fact, who is going to just occupy the White House in January?
Too soon to say. It's still 50-50. This is one of the tightest races I've ever seen in my life. I've been watching American elections since 2000, and this is one of the closest elections we're ever going to have. There's going to be a lot of calls for recounts. Swing states are too close to tell. But it's going to come down to Pennsylvania, most likely. And so that's where we're going to see. Last time in 2020, it was Georgia. This time it's going to be Pennsylvania. And like I said, it's going to be a completely, wild ride for the next week.
But whoever wins, in fact, the next president will have to, and he is likely to, expand relations with India. You are upbeat about the India-U.S. relations.
I'm very upbeat about India-U.S. relationships. I think it's going to survive time. The Republicans, they're going to with India and going to continue a pro-India policy as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you so very much for coming to PTI.
Thank you.
The India-U.S. Ties have been on an upswing in the last few years. So how do you see the trajectory of India-U.S. global partnership going forward in case Mr. Donald Trump comes to power? Or what will be the shape of the relationship if Ms. Harris comes to power? Can you just elaborate on your views?
There may be some political differences in both administrations. I think it's very obvious that the India-U.S. relationship, the partnership is very strong, and it's going to survive either party coming into power. The defense establishment of both countries is very close. We have defense, business, manufacturing, technology relationships that are much more important for both sides. America obviously wants to counter China. India wants to counter China, and so that partnership is going to be much more stronger, and it's going to survive either party coming into power, either side coming into power. That having been said, I think it's very obvious that Donald Trump is going to be much more friendlier to India than the Harris administration. But I also think that the soft power of India, the fact that Indian Americans are here in large numbers, the prominence of Indian Americans is going to soften any sort of anti-India moves that the Harris administration, the left-wing people in the Harris administration may try to do to hurt India, to sort of, make their own political moves towards India. I think it's very obvious from the conversations around India and America that basically India is too important for that political strategy, for politics to matter.
So this election is taking place at a time the world is witnessing various geopolitical turmoils and crises. So the world is actually keenly watching the election in the U.S. So from that perspective, how significant this election is?
Every year people say that this is the most important election ever, every 4 years, and we still have elections every 4 years. So from my perspective, I think it's maybe overblown to say, this is the most important election ever. I think that happens every year. But I do think that this is going to be one of the most significant. We're in a very chaotic era. We've had crises every year. 2021, we had Afghanistan. 2022, we had Ukraine. 2023, we had Israel. And so I think this year is going to be much more crucial. The next coming years are going to be much more crucial in terms of chaos abroad and chaos at home as well. And I think any president, whoever it is, who comes to power needs to make sure that they govern the country and govern the American foreign policy effectively. I think that's what the American people want, and I think that has to be above the day-to-day fights over partisan politics.
You're from India, actually have been living in US for quite some time. For a man on the street in the US, how you will explain the significance of this US presidential election for the India-US relations?
On the street, most people actually don't really know that much about India, but they know Indians. So most people we talk to, they will say, "Oh, I have Indian friends or I have Indian colleagues," and so that's what I talk about when I say there's the soft power of India is much more stronger than the actual, conversations that happen at a high level where you have political battles, you have all kinds of negative conversations, polarized conversations about India-U.S. But most average people, the common person in America, if you talk to them, you will meet people in Texas who are like, "Oh yeah, I helped to set up a factory in Delhi or UP or Gujarat," and so the soft power of India, outweighs any kind of negative conversations that happen about India and America in the news and in the social media.
So in the last few years, we have seen under Biden administration, the relationship has expanded. The rolling out of ISET was one of the defining, success stories of the relations. under ISIL, we have been cooperating in various critical areas, including technology, critical technology sector. And the defense is also expanding. We just signed the deal for procurement of 31 Predator drone deals. So how do you assess the overall trajectory of India-U.S. relations under the Biden administration?
I think overall it's been really good. We saw the creation of the Quad under President Biden. I think he's a little bit annoyed that has not been given. He has not gotten enough credit for that. I think that is to his credit. But like I said, that relationship is a much more longer relationship, so that it's harder for Biden to maybe sometimes take credit for that. But I think overall it's been fairly positive, apart from this very recent Canada-India tiff that we have had. The overall President Biden has been very friendly to India, but maybe not as friendly as other people would have liked. And I think on when you talk to people on the street, I think Indians sort of miss the friendliness that was there during the Trump Modi friendship that was there. We had Howdy Modi in Texas. We had Welcome Trump in India in 2020, and so maybe that sort of outshines any actual partnerships and positivity that happened under the Biden administration.